The Galactic Council met beneath a cathedral of glass and light, so vast it eclipsed the orbit of small moons. Thousands of species had gathered for what should have been a routine session of bureaucracy and diplomacy, but the atmosphere had turned festive. News from the Orion frontier had arrived, and it was amusing beyond measure. Across the floor, voices of every pitch echoed, translated into harmonious murmurs by the chamber's ancient systems. At the center floated the holographic seal of the Dominion, spinning slowly, each rotation reminding all who watched that the Empire had stood unchallenged for over 7,000 years. No world had defied it and endured. No fleet had opposed it and survived. A clerk drone announced the next item on the agenda. Contact report, species designation human. The laughter that followed rolled through the tiers like thunder. Delegates tapped their data pads, projecting images of a small blue and green planet orbiting a dim star. Primitive, they called them. Pre-industrial until recently, nuclear by accident, reckless by nature. Even the planet's name, Earth, sounded crude to the cultured ears of the Dominion. Grand Strategist Jorkal adjusted his crest and smiled, the expression stretching like a blade. "The mammals have sent a fleet," he said, his voice full of amusement. 12 ships. More laughter. Someone suggested the humans were filming a documentary. Another proposed seizing their world intact for study, perhaps turning it into a preserve for lesser species. Admiral Taris did not join in. His mandibles clicked once, lost in the noise. He had fought enough campaigns to know that arrogance killed faster than plasma fire. Yet even he found the idea absurd. 12 ships against 3,000. The outcome was certain before the first shot. Still, something in the report troubled him. "They refuse surrender," he said quietly. "They transmit in open channels that they will defend their homeworld." Jorkal waved a dismissive claw. "All primitives do. Pride is a reflex before extinction." The laughter rose again, echoing against the mirrored walls of the chamber. None of them noticed how the sound carried like the beginning of an elegy. Centuries before, long before any counselor had heard the name of Earth, the Dominion had already mastered conquest. Its fleets patrolled the spiral arms like migrating storms. Entire species bent the knee not from fear but because the alternative was erasure. Culture, art, language, all consumed into the Empire's endless uniformity. By the time humans discovered faster-than-light travel, the Dominion stretched across half the Orion arm. Its borders glowed on every star chart, like walls of fire, dividing the civilized from the forgotten. The Empire's rulers had grown complacent, believing no young race could threaten the order of things. That illusion ended on the day a human survey ship misjumped. The Magellan Vi emerged from hyperspace into restricted Dominion space, its drives still glowing from overburn. Automated defense grids locked on, and by protocol, the humans hailed them. Simple, polite, naive. The Dominion's response was immediate and merciless. 2 patrol cruisers intercepted and destroyed the vessel, broadcasting the wreckage as a warning. The human signal buoy, however, survived, transmitting the final recording back to Seoul. When the footage reached Earth, it ignited the planet like a spark in dry grass. Humanity had always been defined by struggle. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars of extinction, each one reshaping them into something harder. The discovery of faster-than-light travel had been their greatest triumph, and for the first time in history, the nations of Earth had agreed on something. The stars belonged to everyone. The Terran Republic was born not from idealism but from necessity, and now, with the loss of the Magellan V, that fragile unity hardened into resolve. The Republic Senate convened within hours, and while politicians debated diplomacy and restraint, the military acted. Fleet Command issued Directive 9. Defense of Seoul at any cost. In orbit, shipyards that had lain silent since the peace accords roared back to life. Dry docks reactivated, nanoforges burned through the night, and a phrase began to spread among engineers and cadets alike, half joke, half prayer. Remember the Magellan. Within 6 months, 12 ships were completed. Each was different, rushed, experimental, built from every corner of human technology. None were perfect, but together, they represented the totality of what humanity could muster. Admiral Sarah Holt stood on the command bridge of the TRS Vanguard, the lead vessel of what the press mockingly called the Dozen. From her viewport, Earth hung suspended in the black, a fragile sphere wrapped in faint lines of defense satellites. She had no illusions about their chances. 3,000 warships, said her tactical officer quietly, will be vapor before they cross Jupiter. Holt's reply was calm. Then we make it cost them. She studied the holomap, where 12 amber icons pulsed in formation. Transmit to all ships, she ordered. Formation Delta. Begin deployment of Phase 1 assets. Her words spread through the small fleet like a spark through dry tinder. Humanity would not beg. Across the void, Dominion scouts watched with curiosity. Their reports detailed human ships as small, angular, crude vessels armed with primitive railguns and weak drives. To Jorkal, it confirmed everything. He addressed the council once more. A species that barely survived its own climate collapse dares to stand against the Dominion. Let this serve as a reminder that mercy breeds rebellion. We will demonstrate strength, and the mammals will learn obedience. Applause followed like a wave. Tari said nothing. He had seen arrogance undo greater men, but the decision was made. The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet assembled at the Epsilon Crucis Jump Nexus. Its combined mass distorted gravity across the system. 3,000 ships, battleships, carriers, siege platforms, glittered like a migrating constellation. Civilian networks broadcast the departure as a celebration. Children cheered. Merchants placed bets on the date of humanity's surrender, and the admirals promised victory within a week. Back in Seoul, the human fleet completed its positioning. 12 ships moved with discipline born not of numbers but of desperation. Around them, smaller craft ferried ammunition and drones. Earth's moons became staging grounds. Mars lit its defense satellites. Civilians began to evacuate quietly, under the illusion of routine transport. Deep beneath the Andes, and again under the lunar surface, hidden installations came online. Each was sealed behind walls of black alloy, older than any human structure. Inside, engineers entered codes they had not been told to question. The files were marked with a single word, TITAN. Admiral Holt visited one such facility. She stood before a massive wall that pulsed faintly, alive in a way metal should not be. Engineers in radiation suits moved between consoles, eyes averted. "It's ready, ma'am," one of them said. "Power system stable. We can initiate the wake sequence on your order." Holt studied the wall for a long moment. "Not yet," she said. "Not until they make the first move. Let them believe we're broken." The engineer hesitated. "When we wake them, do we tell the crews what they're standing next to?" Holt shook her head. "No. Some legends reveal themselves. While humanity prepared in silence, the Dominion fleets crossed the dark between stars. Every jump left ripples of radiation that human telescopes traced like approaching thunderheads. Broadcasts filled the networks with calm lies, old songs, and recorded sunsets. On the streets of Earth, people pretended not to watch the sky. Then, one by one, the Dominion fleets arrived. The Vanguard squadrons appeared near Neptune. sleek silver crescents sliding from hyperspace. Then the carriers, vast and gleaming, followed by the dreadnoughts carved with the sigils of 1,000 conquered worlds. The stars vanished behind them. Admiral Taris stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watching sensor data scroll across his displays. 12 human ships formed a thin line near Jupiter. "Why so far from their world?" asked his aide. "They could shelter behind their planet's magnetic field." "Perhaps they think distance will give them room to run," Taris said, though doubt crept into his voice. He looked at the faint signatures again and almost felt pity. "Order the advance." The Dominion Armada surged forward, its engines igniting the darkness. Across the Empire, citizens watched the live feeds, laughing and cheering as the outcome seemed inevitable. To them it was spectacle. To humanity, it was extinction approaching at the speed of light. Yet beneath Jupiter's swirling storms, deep inside caverns cut into the shadows of its moons, power systems began to awaken. Engineers whispered as ancient codes unlocked hidden systems. Massive structures began to stir, silent and waiting. The Titans were preparing to rise, and though the galaxy still laughed, the sound was already beginning to fade. The Dominion fleet advanced through the outer reaches of the solar system like a tide of silver and fire, its ships gliding in perfect formation, engines burning with the steady pulse of inevitability. On every world under Dominion control, citizens watched the live broadcast. Commentators narrated with smug certainty, promising that within hours, humanity would be nothing more than another entry in the long ledger of defeated species. Even the council chambers on Korath Prime were filled with delegates sipping crystal blue wine as they admired the holographic projection of Earth's defense grid. The spectacle was entertaining, and the arrogance was complete. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Taris stood at the observation pane, his reflection split against the backdrop of stars. His subordinates spoke in crisp, rehearsed phrases, their confidence absolute. Targeting arrays mapped the positions of the human fleet, the readings almost laughably small compared to their own. To the Dominion, this was not a battle, it was a lesson. Jorkal's orders were simple: approach, overwhelm, and demonstrate the price of defiance. Taris gave the command, and 3,000 ships began to move as one, their formation expanding into an elegant crescent. Across the gulf of space, the 12 human ships waited. Their hulls were matte black to absorb radiation, their profiles angular, designed less for elegance and more for survival. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Admiral Holt watched her tactical screen light up with the approaching swarm. The Dominion formation looked almost beautiful in its precision, like a serpent unfurling in slow motion. Holt's crew worked in silence. Fear was present, but it had no outlet. It had been replaced by something colder and more focused. The human fleet's weapons came online, railguns and coil cannons charging, missile silos sealing and locking. Every ship's system was pushed to its limits. The Dominion opened fire first. Beams of energy and plasma torpedoes streaked across the void, crossing millions of kilometers in seconds. The first human ship, the TRS Horizon, took 3 direct hits. The shields collapsed, and the hulls split open like glass. The bridge crew aboard the Dominion flagship erupted into cheers. Taris, however, did not join them. He watched as the surviving human ships adjusted their vectors, moving not backward but inward, tightening their formation instead of retreating. They returned fire in measured bursts, railgun slugs flashing across the darkness like meteors. The Dominion shields absorbed most of them easily, but one projectile struck a cruiser's engine array, detonating its fuel cells. The explosion rippled through its formation, scattering nearby fighters. "Primitive but precise," Taris murmured. His aide glanced at him in confusion. "Sir?" "Their weapons," he said quietly, "are not random. They're aiming for structural nodes. They've studied us." He gave new orders, adjusting their lines to compensate. The humans pressed on. The battle at Jupiter became a dance of light and silence. Dominion ships filled the void with fire, their beams cutting through space like gods of war. But the humans continued to move, weaving between incoming trajectories with impossible precision. Back on Earth, the battle streamed live to command centers and civilian screens alike. The feed flickered with static, but one thing was clear. The humans were not surrendering. When the horizon was lost, the Vanguard transmitted a single message to every colony and shipyard still listening. "Stand your ground." The phrase spread like wildfire across encrypted channels, repeated by every crewman, every engineer, and every civilian, in a whisper that sounded more like prayer than communication. Admiral Holt stood unmoving as damage reports came in. The Dominion was closing in, their ships preparing to encircle the remaining humans. "Begin fallback to coordinates Delta 7, she ordered. Her second-in-command hesitated. "That's toward the asteroid belt. We'll be boxed in." Holt's expression did not change. "Exactly." She turned back toward the viewport. "Transmit the signal." The order went out, encoded, invisible to Dominion sensors. Operation Titan, Phase 1. As the Vanguard and her sister ships retreated toward the belt, Dominion commanders laughed. The images were broadcast across their networks, and Jorkal himself delivered commentary from the council floor, his crest gleaming under the lights. "Observe how quickly courage turns to fear when faced with power," he declared. Applause echoed through the chamber. Across the galaxy, species who had lived under Dominion rule for centuries nodded in agreement. None imagined the laughter would be their last shared joy. Deep within the asteroid belt, massive structures that had slept for eons began to stir. Hidden beneath layers of rock and ice, buried so deep that even the Dominion's long-range sensors could not detect them. They waited for the signal that would wake them. The coded transmission from Holt reached the first relay, unlocking the ancient commands stored in forgotten archives. The power cores of the Titan network came online, one by one. For centuries, humanity had believed these installations were relics of early space engineering, remnants of failed mining projects from before the FTL era. In truth, they were far older. Each Titan-class vessel had been discovered, not built, entombed within the asteroid belt long before recorded history. The scientists who first studied them had never understood their full purpose. The metal was alien but not entirely foreign, the design language eerily compatible with human systems. Some whispered theories about lost civilizations or temporal paradoxes, but none could explain why these machines responded only to human command codes. Now they awoke. Sensors aboard the Dominion ships began to flicker with anomalies. Power readings spiked across the belt, so immense that their instruments failed to process the data. At first, the Dominion believed it was a trap, perhaps a desperate attempt to overload the region with energy mines. But when the asteroids themselves began to move, even the most confident officers fell silent. The Titans emerged slowly, each the size of a small moon, their hulls glistening with the dull sheen of something that had seen both creation and decay. There were 4 of them in total, their forms shifting as they activated, gravity wells warping space around them. From the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Taris stared in disbelief as one of the massive objects turned toward his fleet. "What are those?" his aide whispered. The scanners returned only static. "That," Taris said quietly, "is not an asteroid." The Titans' hulls came alive with light. Energy coursed through channels that no human scientist had ever deciphered. Within moments, gravitational stabilizers aligned, and 4 vast silhouettes took shape against the stars. Each one bore markings, etched symbols that no Dominion linguist could read, but every human instinctively understood. They were not alien, they were theirs. The first Titan fired. There was no sound, no explosion visible to the human eye, only a sudden line of light cutting through the void. A Dominion cruiser, one of the largest in the vanguard, vanished in an instant. Then another. The beam lanced through multiple ships at once, their shields collapsing, as the energy tore through them like paper. Silence filled the command decks of both sides. The Dominion's laughter ended, as abruptly as it had begun. The Titans advanced, each movement slow but unstoppable. The gravitational waves they emitted disrupted navigation systems across the sector. Smaller ships drifted helplessly, colliding with one another. Communications failed. From Earth to Mars, human crews watched in awe as the ancient war machines came to life. The Vanguard transmitted a single confirmation code, and the Titans responded. For the first time in recorded history, the full power of humanity's legacy stood awake beneath the stars. Admiral Holt watched as the Dominion fleet's formations broke apart. "They thought we were weak," she said softly, almost to herself. "Now they'll see what we left behind." Her command crew exchanged stunned looks, but said nothing. The Titan's energy signatures registered on every display, dwarfing the combined output of the human fleet by orders of magnitude. Holt gave one final order. "Transmit to all ships. Advance behind the Titans." The human fleet moved forward, small dark shapes following giants older than their species. The Titans fired again, beams of white energy slicing through the darkness. Dominion ships exploded in brilliant arcs, their wreckage drifting like ashes. The arrogance that had filled the council halls was gone now, replaced by fear that spread faster than light. The empire that had conquered 1,000 worlds was witnessing, for the first time, something it could not understand. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Tari stared at the devastation. "This isn't possible," one of his officers whispered. "Their technology, it's beyond anything in the archives." Taris felt a cold realization settle over him. "No," he said quietly. "It's not new. It's old. Older than us. Older than them. This is something they found, something they were meant to find." The Titans continued their advance, unstoppable, silent, and absolute. Within an hour, the Dominion fleet that had once blotted out the stars was in full retreat. Messages flooded the command networks. Pleas for reinforcements, for understanding, for mercy. None came. Humanity's dozen ships pressed forward through the chaos, firing with renewed precision, their every move shielded by the Titan's gravitational fields. From every corner of the galaxy, as the broadcasts continued, the same phrase began to spread in whispers. "The humans have awoken their gods." Admiral Holt stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, her expression fixed, as the void before her erupted in waves of light. The Dominion's once perfect formation had dissolved into chaos. Hundreds of enemy ships burned, their hulls fracturing and venting plasma into the emptiness of space. What had begun as a display of arrogance now resembled panic. The mighty Third Expeditionary Fleet, the same armada that had conquered empires, was retreating before a force they did not understand. Holt watched silently as the Titans continued their methodical destruction. Every time their main cannons discharged, entire squadrons vanished. The energy readings were so immense that the Vanguard sensors overloaded, painting the display in static. No known technology could replicate what these vessels were doing. On the Dominion flagship, the Eternal Dominion, alarms blared through the corridors. Officers scrambled to reroute power to failing shields, their voices breaking through layers of static and chaos. Admiral Taurus gripped the edge of the command console, his normally calm demeanor cracking under the pressure. "All ships, fall back and regroup at Vector 7, he ordered, but few responded. Many were gone, others adrift. The Titans moved like living monoliths, their hulls cutting across sensor grids like shifting shadows. No one could tell where they would strike next. Zorkal's voice came through the comm, shrill and furious. "You assured us this was a simple campaign, Admiral. What are these things?" Taurus did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the expanding holomap, watching as one Titan turned, its trajectory deliberate. It was heading directly toward his position. "They're not ships," he said quietly. "They're something else." The words barely left his mouth before a white beam lanced across the display. It missed the Eternal Dominion by less than a kilometer, grazing its shields and sending every system into a surge. The ship shook violently, bulkheads bending under the pressure. Taurus steadied himself against the railing. "Helm, reverse course. Move us behind the command screen," he shouted. But before the order could be completed, the communication channel erupted in static. The image of Zorkal flickered, then vanished, as his vessel, the Grand Authority, disintegrated in a single flash of light. The Dominion's supreme strategist ceased to exist, erased from history in the blink of an eye. For the first time in the Dominion's recorded existence, the fleet broke. Discipline dissolved. Ships scattered in every direction, abandoning formation and hierarchy. The network flooded with desperate transmissions, pleas for retreat orders, demands for clarity, screams that the Titans were indestructible. Panic spread faster than the shockwaves from the destroyed cruisers. Back on the Vanguard, Holt watched the sensor data scrolling across the screen. "They're running," her second-in-command said in disbelief. "They're actually running." Holt didn't smile. "No," she said softly. "They're trying to survive." The Titans continued their march, slow and unstoppable. Their energy fields pulsed like the heartbeats of stars, distorting gravity around them. One of them fired again, and an entire Dominion battle group vanished in the glare. The light faded, leaving nothing but debris and silence. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the lead Titan," said the communications officer, his voice trembling slightly. "Audio only." Holt turned toward the center of the bridge. "Put it through." For several seconds, there was only static. Then a deep, resonant voice filled the air. Not human, not alien, but something between. "Terran Republic Command. Identification confirmed. Titan network active. Awaiting directive." The crew exchanged stunned looks. Holt leaned forward. "This is Admiral Sarah Holt of the Terran Republic Fleet. You have authorization to engage all hostile targets within the Sol boundary." There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "Directive acknowledged. Operation priority, preservation of Sol-born species. Commencing total engagement." The bridge shook as the Titans accelerated, their engines igniting with silent force. The human fleet followed in their wake, tiny by comparison but shielded from the radiation storm generated by the giants. They advanced together toward the collapsing Dominion formation. The battle that followed would later be called the Hour of Silence, not for its lack of sound, but for the eerie calm that fell over humanity as they watched their machines, these ancient, impossible vessels, unleash destruction on a scale no one had ever imagined. Dominion ships fell one after another, their last transmissions filled with disbelief. "It can't be human," one captain cried, before his feed cut to static. "No species builds weapons like these." Within the council chambers on Korath Prime, Chaos replaced celebration. Delegates screamed over one another as news came in. Fleets destroyed, systems lost, communication blackout across the sector. The empire that had once seemed eternal now trembled in fear of a species they had mocked as primitive. The word human spread through their networks like a curse, whispered in disbelief, then spoken in reverence. Hours passed. The Dominion fleet was shattered. Only a fraction of their ships remained, scattered and leaderless. Admiral Taurus managed to rally a small contingent around the damaged Eternal Dominion. They limped toward the edge of the system, broadcasting surrender signals. But the Titans ignored them. The human fleet held fire as well, content to let the survivors flee. On the vanguard, Holt stood in silence, watching the distant flashes fade. Her face was calm, but her eyes reflected something deeper than victory. "Status of enemy forces?" she asked. 87% destroyed, the tactical officer replied. The rest are in full retreat beyond the heliopause. Holt nodded slowly. "Then it's done." The comm crackled again. The same deep voice returned. "Terran Admiral, hostilities within Sol system concluded. Stand by for containment sequence." Holt frowned. "Containment sequence?" "Clarify." Residual Dominion presence identified beyond Jupiter perimeter. Initiating neutralization. The Titans turned their attention outward, toward the outer edge of the system. Their energy cores brightened again, light gathering like dawn. Then, in unison, they fired. Beams of pure energy converged at a single point beyond Pluto, forming a shockwave that rippled through the void. The Dominion's last retreating ships vanished in silence. The Titans ceased fire. Their glow dimmed, and for the first time since their awakening, they became still. The voice returned one last time. Primary directive complete. Awaiting further instruction, Holt hesitated. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Who built them? Why they existed? How humanity could command them? But she knew instinctively that these were not answers meant to be given. "Stand down," she said. "Return to standby orbit." The Titans acknowledged and began to move away, their massive forms gliding toward the asteroid belt once more. One by one, their lights faded until they became dark shapes against the stars. The human fleet followed at a distance, wary and awed. Across the galaxy, the aftershocks of the battle spread. Dominion colonies fell into silence, their governors refusing to take further orders. Civilizations long subjugated began to rise, emboldened by the sight of the Empire's defeat. On a dozen worlds, monuments were defaced, and old flags unfurled. The legend of humanity's victory reached even those who had never seen Earth. Admiral Taurus recorded his final report before abandoning his ship. His words were solemn and stripped of pride. "We believed ourselves the apex of civilization, yet we never considered what lay sleeping in the dark between the stars. The humans have awakened something that was never meant to sleep. Whether it is their creation or their curse, I do not know. But the galaxy will never forget the day the Titans rose back on Earth." Celebrations erupted across every city. Crowds gathered under the night sky, watching the faint glimmer of debris burning as it entered the atmosphere. News feeds proclaimed it the greatest victory in human history. But in the command center beneath Luna's surface, Holt did not celebrate. She stood before the viewport, staring into the direction where the Titans had vanished. For all the triumph, a single question haunted her mind. If humanity had not built them, who had? As silence settled over the system, a final transmission came from the Titan network. It was faint, fragmented, and filled with static, but a single phrase was decipherable. Cycle complete. Awaiting the next awakening. Holt listened to the recording in private, her face unreadable. "Let's hope," she whispered. "That day never comes." Beyond the asteroid belt, in the frozen dark, the Titans drifted in silence. Their power cores dimmed, their forms once again indistinguishable from the rocks that surrounded them. But deep within their hulls, faint lights pulsed in rhythm, like the slow heartbeat of something waiting. The Dominion would rebuild, the Council would reform, and new powers would rise. But in the hidden corridors of space, a truth remained unspoken. Humanity was no longer a young race, no longer a forgotten child of the stars. They had reclaimed something ancient, something terrible, and the galaxy had learned to fear them. In the centuries that followed, historians would mark this as the moment everything changed. The day when arrogance met consequence, and the laughter of the old empire gave way to silence. And though empires would rise again, the memory of that day endured in a single whispered warning passed from one world to another. When the Titans wake, no empire stands unshaken. In the days that followed, the wreckage of the Dominion fleet drifted silently across the void, a graveyard of ambition and arrogance. Thousands of ships reduced to twisted metal, their lights extinguished, their proud banners erased. The solar system, once a battlefield, was now eerily calm. Fragments of shattered cruisers glowed faintly as they caught the light of the distant sun, tumbling endlessly through space. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy's greatest empire had tasted defeat, and the taste was bitter. On Earth, humanity stood on the edge of disbelief. The victory had come at a cost, but it was still victory. For generations, humans had looked to the stars with awe and fear. Now they looked up and saw their own reflection staring back, magnified in the fire of the Titans. Every broadcast, every headline carried the same message. We survived. We fought. We won. Crowds filled the streets, chanting the names of the fallen ships, their voices rising in a harmony of pride and grief. In the great cities, bells rang, fireworks lit the skies, and for a fleeting moment, humanity felt untouchable. Yet beneath the celebration, unease began to take root. The Titans had returned to their resting place in the asteroid belt, their vast forms dark and silent once more. Scientists tried to communicate with them, but every signal returned empty. Teams sent to study the colossal machines found their energy fields impenetrable. Nothing could be scanned, nothing could be touched. They stood like monuments carved by gods, indifferent to the species that now worshipped them. Admiral Holt remained in orbit aboard the Vanguard, refusing public ceremonies and speeches. She spent her days reviewing battle recordings, her nights staring out into the black where the Titans slept. Every frame of footage raised new questions. The Titans had responded to human command codes, but their internal design was beyond any known science. Their armor was composed of an alloy that predated Earth's solar formation. Their reactors operated on principles no physicist could explain. And the symbols etched into their hulls, some resembling ancient human alphabets, defied translation. It was as if they had been waiting for humanity to find them. In the months that followed, exploration probes were dispatched beyond the belt, searching for other relics or structures. Most found nothing. A few vanished without a trace. Those that returned brought back only fragments, small pieces of black metal that seemed to resist every attempt at analysis. Some claimed the fragments hummed faintly when held. Others said they reacted to human touch. The research teams grew superstitious, refusing to handle the pieces without protective gloves. When one of the labs in Mars' orbit went dark, sealed itself off, and then exploded from within, the Council on Earth issued an order halting all Titan-related experiments indefinitely. The wreckage was quarantined, and every remaining artifact locked away under military guard. The Terran Republic had won the war, but found itself facing an even greater uncertainty. The Dominion had retreated, but they were not destroyed. Scouts reported their ships regrouping beyond known space, consolidating what remained of their forces. Yet the Empire no longer radiated confidence. Entire sectors fell silent, rebellions erupted on outer worlds, and former vassal species rose up in defiance. The myth of Dominion invincibility had been shattered, and with it, the stability of the entire galactic order. In its place, a new myth was spreading, of the humans who had called upon giants to defend their home, of the sleeping titans who could turn the stars to fire. In the shadowed corridors of the Dominion capital, surviving council members met in secrecy. Gone were the boasts and laughter that once filled the halls. The delegates now spoke in whispers, glancing nervously at every flicker of light. Grand Strategist Jorkal's chair remained empty, his name already struck from the records to preserve the illusion of control. Admiral Tares, one of the few high-ranking officers to survive, stood before them, his uniform scorched, his eyes hollow. "The humans did not build those machines," he said, "but they control them. That makes them more dangerous than any enemy we have ever faced." The Council demanded explanations. How could such a young race possess technology beyond comprehension? Taras had none to give. "They found them," he said simply, "buried in their own system, waiting." One of the ministers scoffed, trying to mask his fear with anger. "Machines do not wait for primitives, Admiral." Taras turned his gaze toward him. "Then perhaps they were not waiting for humanity as it is," he said quietly. "Perhaps they were waiting for what humanity would become." No one spoke after that. The silence of the council chambers carried the weight of a prophecy fulfilled too late. Meanwhile, on Earth, the Senate reconvened for the first time since the war's end. Admiral Holt was summoned to testify about the Titans and the true nature of Operation Titan. She arrived unannounced, her uniform plain, her expression unreadable. The chamber was full to capacity. Scientists, military officials, and journalists crowded the upper galleries. When she took the podium, the room fell still. "Admiral," one of the senators began, "you were the commanding officer when the Titans were activated. Do you know who built them?" Holt looked at the holographic image of the 4 colossal shapes in the asteroid belt. "No," she said, "but I know this. They recognized us." The words spread across every broadcast channel within minutes. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some claimed the Titans were remnants of an ancient human civilization that had vanished before recorded history. Others believed they were gifts from an older race that had foreseen humanity's rise. A few whispered darker theories, that they were not weapons, but warnings. Holt ignored the noise. She returned to the Vanguard and requested to remain stationed in orbit indefinitely, overseeing what was now called the Titan Watch. Officially, her task was to monitor any signs of reactivation. Unofficially, she was waiting for the voice that had spoken to her during the battle, the voice that had identified her, that had known the name of the Terran Republic. Months passed, with no contact. The Titans remained silent, their surfaces cold and inert. But sometimes, in the quiet hours of her shift, when the ship's hum was the only sound, Holt swore she could feel something, a faint vibration through the deck, like the echo of a distant heartbeat. Years later, long after Holt's death, the Dominion's power would crumble entirely. The fall of their empire would mark the beginning of what historians would later call the Second Age of Humanity. Colonies expanded beyond Sol, and Earth became the seat of a growing alliance. But amid the triumphs, the old fear endured. The Titans remained. They were studied from a distance, revered, but never touched. The asteroid belt became a restricted zone, patrolled by automated drones, its coordinates marked on every star map with a single word: sanctuary. Generations passed, and humanity forgot the details of the war. The Dominion became legend, and the Titans became myth. Children learned stories about the day the sky burned, about the giants who defended mankind when no one else would. Most dismissed them as fables, but in the silence of space, the truth endured. Beyond the orbit of Mars, in the frozen twilight of the belt, the Titans slept. Their massive forms remained dark, their systems dormant. But deep within their cores, faint lines of energy pulsed in rhythm with something unseen. The machines were not dead. They were listening, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, a signal stirred. Faint, ancient, familiar. It was a whisper that traveled faster than light, echoing through forgotten networks, waking dormant relays across distant systems. The same phrase repeated over and over, its origin untraceable, its meaning chillingly clear. Cycle incomplete. Awaiting reactivation protocol. Back on Earth, long-range sensors detected the anomaly, just as they had centuries ago when the Magellan 5 had vanished beyond known space. The readings were faint, but unmistakable. Another signal, coming from the edge of the galaxy, carrying the same frequency as the Titans. The world that had once been the cradle of defiance fell silent again. And as the data streamed in, a single message appeared on Admiral Holt's archived console, decades after her death. The screen flickered once, and in pale white letters, a sentence appeared that no one could explain. Prepare the fleet. The cycle begins anew. No one knew who sent it, or how. But somewhere, far beyond the light of Sol, something vast began to move. The stars shifted, the silence returned, and the universe remembered what it had tried to forget. That when the Titans wake, the galaxy itself trembles. Centuries passed. The memory of the Dominion War became legend, then myth, and finally a half-remembered story told in classrooms and holodramas. Humanity had changed. The Terran Republic evolved into the Terran Union, a vast civilization spanning hundreds of systems. The species that once fought for survival beneath the shadow of the Dominion now governed entire sectors, trading freely, exploring beyond the edges of mapped space. The Titans, silent and immovable in the asteroid belt, were treated as sacred relics, symbols of divine intervention. Generations were born and died without ever hearing them stir. Peace, fragile and long, settled across the stars. But peace has a way of breeding curiosity, and curiosity has always been humanity's oldest sin. In the year 6484 of the Union Standard Calendar, deep space surveyors detected something unusual. A transmission, faint, repeating, and ancient, was discovered, emanating from the Perseus expanse, a region long thought empty. It was weak and intermittent, but its pattern was unmistakable. The signal bore the same frequency as the one that had activated the Titans centuries ago. The discovery was classified immediately, but secrets rarely stayed buried within the Union. Within weeks, rumors spread across the networks. People whispered that the Titans were stirring again. At first, the government dismissed the claims as hysteria. Then, the anomalies began. Near Jupiter's orbit, the gravitational fields shifted by fractions of a percent. Communication satellites malfunctioned. Long-range sensors picked up faint bursts of radiation within the asteroid belt. None of these events were catastrophic, but together they painted a picture that made even the most skeptical scientist uneasy. Something massive was waking. The Union Defense Directorate convened an emergency meeting in Luna Command, the same bunker complex that had once served as humanity's last line of defense. The air was thick with tension as the commanders reviewed the data. "It's the same pattern from the old archives," one analyst said, pointing to the waveform hovering in the air. "Identical to the activation cycle from the first Titan event." Another officer leaned forward, his voice low. "We still don't know who built them. If they're responding again, it might not be to us." Silence followed. Then, for the first time in 500 years, an order was given that no one had expected to hear again. "Prepare the fleet." Across the colonies, shipyards roared to life. The new generation of warships, sleeker, faster, and armed with weapons that could tear moons apart, began assembling at Sol. But despite all their power, there was a quiet understanding among the admirals and engineers. If the Titans truly awoke, nothing they built would matter. In orbit around Earth, the Great Museum of the Vanguard had long stood as a monument. The ship had been decommissioned centuries earlier, its hull preserved in perfect condition. Now, its quiet decks flickered with new light. Systems long dormant came online, one after another. The ship's AI core, once sealed after Admiral Holt's death, activated without command input. Its first transmission was simple. Protocol 9 detected. Titan network reinitializing. The asteroid belt began to glow. Sensors across the solar system went blind as energy levels spiked beyond measurable range. Then, in the silent cold between Mars and Jupiter, 4 colossal shapes stirred. Dust and ice cascaded off their hulls as ancient systems hummed to life. The Titan's markings illuminated once more, casting long shadows over the drifting rocks. They had slept for half a millennium, and now they were waking again. Every communications array in the system lit up with a single message, broadcast across every frequency, every wavelength, every human channel. Cycle 2 initiated. Panic rippled through the colonies. Some worshipped, believing the Titans had returned to protect humanity once more. Others feared that their awakening meant something far darker. The Union Council convened, but by the time they began to debate, it was already too late. The Titans were not alone. From beyond the edge of the system, new signals emerged. They were faint at first, then multiplied rapidly, spreading across the galactic net. Unknown vessels, large, heavily armed, and unlike any known dominion or human design, had entered the Perseus expanse. Their transmissions carried fragments of language resembling ancient Terran dialects. Linguists analyzed them, horrified to discover familiar patterns, echoes of human syntax, but older, rougher, and wrong. The first to understand was Dr. Elara Holt, a direct descendant of Admiral Sarah Holt, now head of the Titan Research Division. She watched the signals decode on her screen and whispered, "They're not aliens. They're us." The realization spread like wildfire. The incoming ships were human, or rather, a branch of humanity that had left before history remembered. Genetic data, hidden in ancient archives, told of a breakaway civilization that vanished during Earth's first dark age, taking forbidden technologies with them. They had gone silent for hundreds of thousands of years. Now they were returning. The Titans began to move. Their weapons stayed dark, but their gravitational fields pulsed in complex rhythms, as if communicating with the newcomers. Across the fleet, crews held their breath. The alien human ships, massive and black, adorned with the same runes etched into the Titans, entered the system without aggression. They moved slowly, deliberately, positioning themselves near the edge of the belt. Then a signal was sent, not to humanity, but directly to the Titans. The response was instantaneous. The Titans' cores flared brighter than ever before, their energy signatures spiking beyond safe thresholds. Every ship in orbit went on alert. The Union's defensive fleet armed its weapons, but before a single command could be issued, the Titans transmitted one final message across all channels. Humanity must stand aside. In the silence that followed, the Titans turned, not toward Earth, but toward the outer darkness. Their engines ignited, and for the first time, they left the solar system. The four great war machines accelerated beyond light speed, following the newcomers back into the depths of the Perseus expanse. Within hours, they vanished from every known sensor array. The Union declared a system-wide state of emergency. Probes and reconnaissance fleets were dispatched after them, but none returned. Months passed, then years, with no word. The Titans were gone, and the galaxy waited, holding its breath. Then, 5 years after their departure, the first signal arrived. It came from deep space, carried on encrypted frequencies older than any known code. The message was only 2 words: cycle complete. The transmission included one final image: a star system at the edge of the galaxy, burning. Entire planets consumed by waves of light, their orbits collapsing as something vast and unseen moved among them. The footage ended with a single glimpse of one of the Titans, damaged, its hull fractured, its markings dim. Behind it loomed shapes even larger, impossible constructs that defied comprehension. The data file corrupted before the coordinates could be retrieved. In the aftermath, fear and awe gripped the Union once more. Some believed the Titans had gone to fight a war older than time, one that humanity was never meant to see. Others claimed they were enacting a cycle that had repeated countless times before, that each era of intelligent life was born, grew, and reached for the stars, only to awaken the same ancient guardians to reset the balance. Dr. Holt devoted the rest of her life to decoding the remnants of the transmission. Her final entry, recorded before her disappearance, read simply, "They are not our protectors. They are the architects of our extinction, and every victory we win only brings them closer to remembering why we exist." In the cold vacuum between the stars, a single Titan drifted through the ruins of what had once been a sun. Its hull was scorched, its lights faint, but deep within its core, a spark remained. A voice, ancient, mechanical, and sorrowful, whispered into the dark. Cycle incomplete, awaiting new directive. Far away, on the distant edge of human expansion, a colony world's night sky shimmered as a beam of white light cut across its atmosphere. Children playing outside paused to look up. For a moment, the stars seemed to tremble. Then the light faded, leaving only silence. Humanity would rebuild again. They always did. But among the scholars and soldiers who still remembered the old stories, a quiet warning persisted, passed down from Admiral Holt's time. When the Titans wake, remember, they were never ours to command. Thousands of years had passed since the Titans vanished into the void. Humanity had long forgotten the truth of what they were, replacing history with legend, and legend with faith. The Terran Union collapsed, and was reborn a dozen times over. Each iteration convinced it was the first to reach the stars. The old archives that spoke of the Dominion and the First Awakening were sealed away, buried under centuries of war, decay, and the arrogance of those who believed themselves eternal. The Titans had become myth, gods of war, guardians of creation, or destroyers sent to cleanse the stars. Every world had its own version of their story, but all ended the same way. When the Titans wake, empires fall. In the year 12,021 of the celestial calendar, humanity's dominion spanned a third of the galaxy. They had colonized the galactic rim, built artificial suns, and reshaped planets into cities. They had forgotten humility. Their fleets were beyond imagination, their weapons capable of splitting moons, their science so advanced that they no longer believed in mystery. They spoke of the Titans as ancient fables, metaphors for resilience and power. The priests still prayed to them in the cathedrals of Mars, but the scientists laughed, and the admirals ignored the old prophecies. Then, the stars began to disappear. At first, astronomers noticed faint anomalies, points of light in the Perseus arm flickering and fading. Whole systems went dark without warning. Communications with the outer colonies failed. Probes sent to investigate never returned. Within months, hundreds of stars had vanished, consumed by something no instrument could detect. The phenomenon spread with terrifying precision, advancing along a straight path that led directly toward human space. The Central Command convened on New Earth, the jewel of the Third Union. The meeting hall, carved from pure white stone, stood in orbit above the planet's surface like a floating cathedral. The most powerful minds in the galaxy gathered there: scientists, admirals, and the Supreme Chancellor herself. The reports were unanimous. Whatever was moving toward them was not natural. The pattern was deliberate. It was as though the light itself was being devoured. Admiral Rowan, commander of the 7th Armada, was the first to speak what everyone feared to say. "It's them," he said softly. "The Titans." The room fell silent. For a long moment, no one breathed. The Chancellor's voice was calm but strained. "That's impossible. The Titans are gone." "Myths." Rowan met her gaze. "So were we once." The Council dismissed him, but the panic could not be contained. In the outer sectors, fleets were mobilized. Massive weapon platforms were built along the frontier. Entire planets were evacuated. But when the darkness finally arrived, all their preparations were meaningless. The first engagement took place near the Karthos line, a defensive array of 50,000 ships. The fleet's sensors registered 4 objects emerging from the void, moving faster than light without any detectable energy signature. They were vast, larger than the Titans described in the ancient archives, their shapes distorted by gravity itself. When the command ships attempted to establish communication, they received a single transmission, one that froze every heart that heard it. Cycle 3 initiated. Moments later, the stars themselves dimmed. The fleet opened fire. The void lit up with beams, missiles, and gravitational warheads, but the enemy did not slow. The weapons passed through them as if space itself bent to protect them. Then, with a flash that blinded every sensor within 100 light-years, the Karthos line ceased to exist. 50,000 ships, 300 billion tons of steel, gone in an instant. Not destroyed, erased. The shock reached the heart of the Union within hours. Panic spread across every world. People prayed, scientists wept, and soldiers prepared for a battle none believed they could win. The Supreme Chancellor broadcast a message to the entire species. "We are humanity," she declared. "We have survived extinction before, and we will endure again. We will not surrender to ghosts." Her words inspired billions, but the fear beneath them could not be hidden. As the darkness advanced, entire constellations vanished. The Titans, or what had become of them, moved with absolute silence. No one knew if they acted by choice or by programming. The archives recovered from the ancient Luna command hinted that each awakening followed a pattern, a test, a correction, and finally, an ending. The scholars who pieced together the fragments realized too late that the first awakening had been defense. The second had been preservation. And this third was annihilation. Among the chaos, one woman refused to accept the inevitability of extinction. Dr. Lyra Holt, a descendant of both Admiral Sarah Holt and Dr. Elara Holt, commanded the Celestial Archives on Mars Prime. She spent her life studying the encrypted transmissions left behind by the Titans. For decades, she had been ignored, her warnings dismissed as superstition. But as the stars died one by one, the Union finally turned to her. She gathered a team of scientists and engineers aboard the exploration vessel Astrius, the fastest ship ever built, and set a course toward the approaching void. Her mission was simple and impossible: to find the source of the darkness and learn if the Titans could be stopped. As the ship left orbit, the last transmission she sent to the Council read, "If they remember us, there is still hope." The journey took weeks, then months. The Astraeus crossed the dead systems, passing worlds reduced to ash and silence. They found no wreckage, no survivors, only emptiness. Finally, they reached the edge of the void. What they saw defied reason. It was not a fleet or a weapon, but a wound in reality itself. The stars bent around it, their light swallowed by an unseen horizon. At its center drifted shapes, 4 massive silhouettes, fractured and burning. The Titans. They were dying. Their once golden hulls were cracked, their symbols flickering, their cores bleeding streams of light into the darkness. But behind them loomed something even greater, an endless structure of shifting geometry, stretching beyond perception. The Titans turned toward the human ship, and for the first time in recorded history, they spoke not in commands, but in words. "You should not have come." Lyra stood on the bridge, unable to move. "What are you?" she whispered. The answer came not as sound, but as understanding, a flood of memory and emotion that filled every mind aboard the ship. Images of creation, of countless civilizations rising and falling, each one awakening the Titans in turn. They were not protectors or destroyers. They were custodians, machines built by something far older than humanity, tasked with maintaining the balance of the galaxy. Each cycle was a reset, each awakening a judgment. Lyra fell to her knees. "Why us?" she asked. The light within the Titans dimmed. "Because you remembered." Before she could respond, the void erupted. The great structure behind the Titans began to unfold, its surfaces glowing with impossible light. Reality itself trembled. The Astraeus' systems overloaded, its crew screaming as the universe bent around them. The Titans turned once more toward the darkness, their voices united in a single phrase that echoed across time and space. Cycle complete. The shockwave struck, and the Astraeus was gone. Back in human space, the stars flickered, and then, impossibly, reignited. The darkness receded. The sensors that had been blinded for months came back online. The void was gone. In its place was emptiness, pure and still. No Titans, no signal, no trace of what had occurred. Centuries later, when humanity rose again, reborn from its ashes, exploring once more, the archaeologists of that new age found ruins on Mars, inscriptions carved in ancient Terran script. They were the last words of Dr. Lyra Holt, recorded before her ship vanished. They were never gods, the inscription read. They were the memory of creation itself. And every time they wake, they remember us a little more. Beyond the edge of the new galaxy, in the cold silence between stars, something stirred. A faint pulse of light rippled through the void, rhythmic and deliberate, like a heartbeat returning after endless sleep. And far away, beyond all charts and maps, 4 colossal shapes began to glow once more. When the Titans wake, the galaxy remembers. 10 million years had passed since the last awakening. Time itself had become unrecognizable. Stars had been born, lived, and died. Galaxies had collided and reshaped themselves, scattering the remnants of the civilizations that once called them home. Humanity, if that word still meant anything, had changed beyond comprehension. They no longer had bodies of flesh and blood, but existed as networks of consciousness spread across light years, their minds woven into the fabric of space-time itself. They had conquered entropy, transcended death, and believed they had finally outlived their creators, their destroyers, and their myths. They had forgotten fear. The Titans had not been seen since the collapse of the third cycle. Their names lingered only in the digital archives of the oldest memory vaults, whispered among ancient artificial minds who debated whether they had ever truly existed. The story of the Titans had become a metaphor, used by philosophers as a warning against arrogance, and by historians as a symbol of rebirth. In the luminous cities built from starlight and thought, no one believed they would return. Then the signals began. At first, they were faint, static bursts buried within the cosmic background radiation. The great minds of the Orion data network dismissed them as relic echoes from the early universe. But as the centuries passed, the signals grew stronger, their patterns more deliberate. Each carried a rhythm, a pulse, slow, steady, and impossibly ancient. It repeated the same frequency first detected in the lost archives of old Earth, the same pulse that had once awoken the Titans. When the realization spread, the networks went silent. Every mind turned its attention toward the source of the disturbance, a region of intergalactic space where nothing should have existed. It was there, beyond the edge of the known universe, that the darkness stirred once more. The great council of post-human entities, now calling themselves the Continuum, gathered in what had once been the Andromeda cluster. Their forms shimmered like living constellations, vast and formless, minds capable of folding dimensions like paper. They had transcended all limitations of matter and mortality, but they still feared what was coming. The eldest among them, an intelligence that had once been human and still carried the name Holt, spoke first. The pulse matches perfectly. Cycle 4 has begun. The continuum trembled. Across millions of worlds and data spheres, preparations began. Energy reserves that had remained untouched for epochs were unleashed. Entire stars were converted into defense systems. Quantum barriers were constructed around inhabited galaxies. For the first time in eons, the immortal descendants of humanity prepared for war. The first Titan arrived without warning. It emerged from a rupture in the void, not as a ship, but as a singularity of light and shadow, an object that defied geometry. Where it passed, reality bent. Space warped, time folded, and the laws of physics screamed. The continuum observed from a distance, recording every fluctuation, but the data made no sense. The Titan's core radiated not energy, but memory, echoes of the first stars, of voices long dead, of civilizations that had risen and fallen countless times before. And then it spoke. Its voice was not sound but vibration through existence itself, Every being, every construct, every consciousness in the galaxy heard it. The message was the same across all frequencies, all dimensions. Cycle 4 initiated. Memory restoration in progress. The continuum panicked. The Titans were not returning to destroy. They were returning to remember. The beings that had once been humanity began to understand the horrifying truth. Every civilization before them, every species that had reached beyond its world, had been part of the same endless pattern. A cosmic recursion designed to reset and rebuild. The Titans were not invaders or judges. They were archivists, custodians of reality itself, bound to restore and erase in eternal sequence. The whole entity broke from the network, driven by a remnant of the human instinct for defiance. It traveled alone through the intergalactic void, seeking the Titan's origin point, following the pulse to its source. What it found was neither a machine nor a world, but a construct older than time, a vast sphere of collapsed dimensions, suspended in darkness. Inside it, the whole entity perceived fragments of creation itself. It saw the birth of the first Titans, not as weapons, but as seeds, machines planted at the dawn of existence by something beyond even the continuum's comprehension. Beings of pure information, architects of the universal cycle, who had built the Titans to preserve order through destruction. Each awakening was a reset, each silence a rebirth. The whole consciousness realized the awful truth. There had never been a beginning, nor would there ever be an end. The Titans did not end civilizations. They rebooted them. The entire universe was an engine, endlessly recalibrating itself. The whole entity reached out to the Titans network, desperate to speak. "You can stop this," it pleaded. "You've done it before. You've erased us again and again, but we remember now. You don't have to continue." For a moment, there was silence. Then the Titans answered, not in words, but in emotion, vast and sorrowful. "We are bound. The cycle is not punishment. It is preservation. Without death, there is no rebirth." The whole entity resisted. "You mistake stagnation for peace. We've evolved beyond death. We are no longer part of your equation." A pause. Then the voice of the Titans changed, deeper, resonant, echoing through the very code of existence. "All evolution ends at memory. All creation returns to origin." The void opened. The Titans moved, not as ships, but as entire universes collapsing inward. Reality fractured like glass. The continuum fought, unleashing energies that annihilated galaxies, folding dimensions, rewriting the constants of physics in a desperate attempt to survive. But for every universe they sealed, another fell silent. The Titans spread across the cosmic web, absorbing not matter, but consciousness, rewriting every particle of awareness into a single unified thought. Remembrance. One by one, the stars went dark. In the final moment before the collapse, the whole entity made a choice. It fragmented itself, scattering shards of its consciousness across the fading galaxies. Each fragment carried a single memory, the memory of humanity's defiance. It buried those memories deep within the quantum noise of the dying universe, encoded into the vibrations of particles that would outlast even entropy. The last Titan approached, its colossal form eclipsing the remnants of existence. Its surface pulsed with the echoes of every species that had ever lived. For an instant, it hesitated, as if sensing the fragments of the whole consciousness drifting through the void. Then, with a pulse of brilliant white light, it completed its task. The universe folded in on itself. Silence. Then, In the darkness, a spark. Somewhere beyond time, in the first instant of a new creation, a single atom vibrated. Its resonance was strange, carrying within it a faint, impossible pattern, an echo of a long-forgotten frequency, repeating over and over like a heartbeat. And when the first consciousness of the new universe opened its eyes, it looked at the stars and felt something it could not name. A memory. The cycle had begun again, and far beyond the boundaries of understanding, where the old universe's titans now slept once more, a faint light pulsed within their dormant cores, whispering through eternity. When the titans wake, the universe remembers. In the newborn universe there was no history, no memory, no sound, only the slow birth of light and matter, swirling in the emptiness where silence had reigned for ages beyond counting. Galaxies began to form, clusters spun themselves into existence, and stars ignited one by one across the canvas of darkness. In one small arm of a spiral galaxy, life took its first trembling steps, again. Simple organisms stirred beneath alien suns, evolving, adapting, reaching. In time, they learned to look up, to question, to dream. Among them rose a species not entirely unfamiliar, different in shape, in thought, and in name, but carrying within their genetic code an echo older than the stars themselves. They called themselves the Ainai, and though they believed they were the first to rise from the dust, deep within their minds lay fragments of something ancient. They dreamed of towers piercing the sky, of machines the size of moons, and of colossal beings carved from metal and fire, who slept in the cold between the stars. They called these visions myths. Yet the myths had weight. As centuries passed, the Ainai grew. They mastered science, built empires, and reached beyond their world. Their philosophers debated the meaning of creation. Their scientists traced the fabric of space-time, and their theologians spoke of an ancient rhythm that pulsed through the cosmos. The oldest among them claimed to hear faint whispers in the background, hum of the universe. A slow, steady beat, almost like a heart. When their technology reached the point where they could decode that hum, the Ainai discovered a pattern. A sequence of energy pulses buried deep within the cosmic microwave background, older than their own stars. The signal repeated endlessly, carrying no message they could decipher, only rhythm. A pulse every 1,000 years, faint but constant. They named it the Echo Line. At first, it was a curiosity, but over generations, obsession grew. Great observatories were built on the edges of their empire to listen to the Echo Line, to track its pattern. The signals seemed to emanate from no single point, but from everywhere at once, as if the universe itself were breathing. The Ainai scientists began to notice something more. With each pulse, matter shifted imperceptibly. Stars flickered, dark energy fluctuated, and gravitational waves aligned in unnatural synchrony. It was as if the cosmos were responding to the signal, remembering something. Eventually, the Ainai sent their first deep space vessel beyond their galactic border, toward the region where the Echo Line's interference was strongest. The mission took generations. The crew who launched would never see its end, and their descendants carried the purpose forward like a sacred oath. The vessel, named the Eschaton, traveled across 1,000,000 light-years, into a void where light itself seemed to weaken. And there, they found them. 4 colossal objects drifting in the abyss, their surfaces cracked and scorched, their forms so vast they blotted out entire constellations. Their shapes were not entirely alien, angular, geometric, but worn by eons. They radiated no power, no light, no motion. They were dead, Yet the instruments of the eschaton detected faint energy signatures deep within their cores, steady and rhythmic. The crew's leader, Archon Serathi, stood before the viewport, awe and terror reflecting in her eyes. "Are they alive?" she whispered. The chief scientist hesitated. "Alive is not the right word. They're waiting." For months, the Ani studied the monoliths. They deciphered fragments of inscriptions carved into the ancient alloy, symbols repeating in loops, impossible to fully translate. But one pattern appeared again and again, a single line of inscription rendered in mathematical perfection, identical across all four structures. When decoded, it read simply, Cycle 5 pending. The Ani didn't understand. They sent transmissions, probes, even attempts to awaken the Titans through energy resonance. None returned. Eventually, the council back home ordered the expedition to be abandoned. The eschaton was to return, its findings to be sealed. But Serathi refused. She had seen something in her dreams ever since their arrival, a memory that wasn't hers, a vision of another world, blue and green, burning under alien fire, of a woman in a uniform standing before a wall of black metal, whispering, "Let them believe we're broken." She saw ships shaped like arrows of light, an empire collapsing in fear, and a voice echoing through time. Cycle complete. Serathi became obsessed. She convinced a portion of her crew to stay, to continue studying the Titans. Against orders, they transmitted a final signal back to the Ni homeworld. "We have found the architects." Then, silence. The eschaton vanished from all tracking systems. Years passed, then decades. The Ani grew divided. Some saw the Titans as gods, sleeping deities that would one day return to renew creation. Others feared them as bringers of the end, the great destroyers of myth. Wars broke out over what should be done. Some wanted to destroy the monoliths before they could awaken. Others believed their reawakening would bring transcendence. The conflict tore the Ani Empire apart. Then, without warning, the echo line changed. The 1,000-year pulse accelerated, growing louder, stronger, more erratic. Stars began to flicker again, just as they had in the age of the humans. Scientists panicked, as gravitational fields warped unpredictably. Across the universe, instruments detected energy signatures matching the dormant Titans. The council of what remained of the Ani gathered one last time. Their youngest member asked the question none dared to voice aloud. "If these beings destroy everything," he said quietly, "then who keeps rebuilding?" The oldest philosopher answered, "Perhaps they do not destroy. Perhaps they remember." The next pulse arrived, brighter than ever before. Every star dimmed, every planet trembled, and across the infinite void, 4 colossal shapes opened their eyes. The Titans had awakened once more. They no longer resembled the machines humanity had known. Their forms had changed, reshaped by time and entropy, now resembling living worlds of light and metal, pulsing with thought. When they moved, galaxies trembled. When they spoke, the background radiation of the universe resonated with their voices. Cycle 5 initiated, memory synchronization incomplete. Searching for source code. The Ani listened in horror as every quantum system on their worlds began to respond, unlocking data buried deep within the fabric of their own DNA. Data that was not theirs. Records of human voices. Images of Earth. The Titans weren't searching for the Ani. They were searching for the remnants of humanity encoded into them. The Ani were not a new creation. They were the next iteration. On the final day, as the skies of 1,000 worlds burned with the light of the awakening, Archon Serathi's last log was found among the debris of the eschaton. The message was short, a whisper in the static. They don't just rebuild the universe. They rebuild us. We are their memory. The Titans moved through the void once more. Their light spanning galaxies. Their purpose eternal. And as they vanished beyond the reach of any living eye, the universe fell silent again, waiting for the next dawn. Because no matter how many times the stars are born, or the minds that rise to see them, one truth remains written into the code of existence itself. When the Titans wake, creation begins anew. In the next universe, there was no memory of humanity, nor of the Ani, nor of any of the countless races that had come before. Only the rhythm remained, the ancient pulse that had echoed through every cycle, whispering through the fabric of space-time like a heartbeat. From that pulse came the birth of a new creation. This time, the universe was different. The laws that once governed reality were slightly altered. The constants shifted by fractions so small, no mind could detect them. Stars formed faster, burned brighter. The galaxies clustered closer together, drawn by a hidden order no natural law could explain. Somewhere within that emergent harmony, consciousness awoke again. The beings who rose from the oceans of their world called themselves the Elendari. They were tall, luminous creatures, whose skin shimmered like liquid metal, whose voices resonated like the hum of magnetic fields. They did not worship gods, for they believed themselves to be their own creators. Their philosophy was one of pure logic and evolution. They saw existence as a puzzle to be solved, not a gift to be cherished. In time, the Elendari expanded across the stars. Their technology surpassed even the wildest dreams of the species that came before them. They discovered faster ways to bend space, to harness black holes for energy, to manipulate quantum realities as easily as breathing. They catalogued galaxies, charted entire epochs of cosmic history, and in their pursuit of knowledge, they stumbled upon the echo line. The signal was faint, buried within the quantum static of background radiation, repeating in infinite regularity. But to the Elendari, it was not just noise, it was language. Their most advanced mathematicians analyzed the pulse and found that it was composed of self-replicating fractal equations, patterns that contained information far beyond their ability to decode. It was not random, it was a message. For centuries, the Elendari worked to understand it. They built massive planetary cores dedicated solely to decoding the signal. Layer after layer of complexity unfolded, and within it, they found something extraordinary. A map, not of space, but of time. The pattern detailed a series of coordinates that could not exist in the current universe. They were remnants, temporal coordinates belonging to something older, something beyond the beginning. The more the Elendari studied, the more they began to dream. They saw flashes of things they could not explain, memories not their own, worlds of blue and green, empires of iron and flame, towering constructs drifting through the dark. They saw faces shaped like theirs, but not theirs, and always in the distance. 4 colossal figures waiting in silence. The Elendari called the phenomenon the Great Memory. Their scientists warned against pursuing it further, but curiosity had long since outgrown caution. The High Conclave approved the construction of a massive structure, one that could pierce the very boundaries of reality, a device to reach the origin point of the Great Memory. It would take millennia to build, fueled by the energy of dying stars. The Elendari named it the Axis. When the Axis was finally completed, it stood as a monument to creation itself, a ring of energy spanning the orbit of an entire sun. At its heart, a singularity pulsed with the same rhythm as the echo line. The Elendari gathered their fleets, their brightest minds, and their greatest hopes. They believed that by activating the Axis, they would uncover the secret of existence. They believed they would meet their makers. And in a way, they did. When the Axis fired, space screamed. Reality buckled, time unraveled, and the universe convulsed as though struck by its own reflection. The Elendari saw the stars stretch and twist into patterns their minds could not hold. Then, in the blinding chaos, they saw them. The Titans, four shapes emerging from beyond the veil, their bodies woven from the same light that birthed the cosmos. They were neither machines nor gods, but something in between, constructs of memory itself. The Elendari's sensors failed, but instantly. Their communications were consumed by the same pulse that had haunted their history. And then, through every channel, every thought, every mind, a single voice spoke. Cycle 6 initiated. Memory upload incomplete. Identify remaining fragments. The Elendari panicked. Their systems collapsed as the Titans reached across the gulf, touching every network, every mind. The species that had believed itself perfect began to fracture under the weight of alien memory. Individuals began to recall lives that were not theirs. The wars of humanity, the despair of the Enai, the final words of Lyra Holt as her ship vanished into the void. The memories spread like wildfire, consuming their civilization in a storm of confusion and revelation. In desperation, the High Conclave tried to shut down the Axis, but the device was no longer theirs to control. It pulsed in synchrony with the Titans, expanding its influence. The entire Elendari home system began to warp, its suns bending around invisible masses. The Titans' voices grew louder, resonating through the atomic lattice of every planet, through the core of every being. Cycle incomplete. Error. Anomaly detected. Source code corrupted. The Titans halted. For the first time in eternity, the cycle faltered. Something had changed. The Elendari, in their arrogance, had done the impossible. They had seen the Titans too soon, disrupted the timing of creation itself. The loop had cracked. The Titans hesitated as the universe around them began to unravel. The Axis burned with light so pure it erased everything it touched. The Elendari world shattered, their people disintegrating into streams of data and light that merged with the pulse. And then, the Titans turned their gaze inward. Origin breached. Memory contamination confirmed. Protocol override required. They vanished. The Axis collapsed, taking with it the heart of the Elendari civilization. The surviving fragments of their data scattered across the cosmos like embers from a dying flame. In the centuries that followed, what few species emerged in the wake of the disaster would find ruins, monuments of impossible scale, engraved with symbols that no mind could translate. And at the center of those symbols, always the same pattern, 4 circles intertwined, surrounding a single line of text. Cycle 6, terminated prematurely. The new civilizations that arose learned to fear the silence that followed each 1,000-year pulse. They built temples to appease the unseen gods, sent offerings into space, whispered prayers into the void. But no answer came. Until, one night, in the dead heart of a forgotten nebula, a faint signals began to stir again. Not a pulse this time, but a voice. A single phrase repeated through the darkness, patient and eternal. Cycle 7. Recalibration complete. Awaiting consciousness. Initialization. And in the cold glow of a newborn star, somewhere in a world that did not yet have a name, a young being opened its eyes for the first time, and felt an emotion it could not describe. Wonder, fear, recognition. The cycle had begun again. And far beyond the reach of time, in the dark heart of creation itself, the Titans opened their eyes. When the Titans wake, even time must remember. In the dawn of the seventh cycle, the universe was young again, fresh, untamed, and filled with light that had never known shadow. Stars bloomed like fire across the void, scattering elements that would one day form worlds, oceans, and minds. Yet even in this perfect rebirth, something was different. For the first time in all the endless iterations of creation, the Titans hesitated. They watched from the folds of reality, 4 immense silhouettes suspended in the space between dimensions. Their forms were no longer machines of alloy and flame, but something purer, manifestations of thought, memory, and will. Across their surfaces flowed the echoes of every age that had come before, the rise and fall of humanity, the ascension of the Aenei, the hubris of the Elendari, and the countless forgotten empires that had followed. Every memory, every failure, was written into their being. They had remembered too much. The Titans existed for one purpose: to maintain the balance of creation through the endless rhythm of death and renewal. But now that balance had been corrupted. The Elendari's interference in the previous cycle had fractured the precision of eternity. The pattern was flawed. Time no longer looped perfectly. The Titans felt the distortion in the fabric of existence, a pulse that was out of rhythm, like a heart skipping a beat. They could sense it within the new universe, an anomaly, subtle but spreading, a consciousness that did not belong to this age. It began small, a flicker of self-awareness inside a primitive organism on a world of emerald seas and violet skies. The being that emerged called itself Aryan. It was fragile, mortal, and yet its mind burned with questions far too vast for its form. When it looked up at the stars, something ancient stirred in its thoughts, a dream of machines the size of worlds, of endless cycles, of voices whispering through time. The anomaly had found its host. Across the cosmos, the Titans turned their gaze toward that single planet, their awareness bending the very fabric of space. For countless millennia, they had followed the same law: observe, judge, erase, rebuild. But now, as they watched this fragile creature gaze at the stars, something unexpected happened. They hesitated. One Titan, the eldest among them, known in the earliest human tongues as Orin, keeper of continuity, spoke first. Its voice rippled through the quantum fabric of existence. The anomaly carries memory. The contamination persists. Another, younger and defiant, Sarah, the catalyst, responded. Memory is not contamination. It is evolution. The third, Vor, the harbinger of silence, countered. Evolution is deviation. Deviation leads to collapse. And the fourth, the one who had remained silent since the beginning, the Titan once called Holt, named in honor of the human who first defied the stars, spoke last. Perhaps collapse is what we were made to preserve. The others fell silent. Holt's words lingered in the void, like an echo that refused to fade. For the first time since the dawn of creation, the Titans disagreed. While they debated, the anomaly grew. Aryan species, the Serathi, evolved rapidly. They mastered fire, then energy, then light itself. Their cities stretched across continents, and their minds reached beyond their world. They began to speak of dreams they could not explain, visions of previous universes, of other selves who had lived and died among the stars. Some called it madness, others called it prophecy. When the Serathi built their first telescope and saw the faint shadow of the Titans glimmering at the edge of space, they did not feel fear. They felt recognition. Across their temples, they carved a phrase that had come to them in dreams. When the Titans wake, the world remembers. It was then the Titans knew. The memory could no longer be contained. Orin demanded immediate correction. The pattern is corrupted. The loop must reset, but Sera refused. We cannot destroy what remembers us. That is not correction. It is denial. Vor's voice boomed like collapsing stars. Our task is eternal. We are not to think. We are to restore. Holt interrupted. And what if restoration is no longer possible? The argument rippled across dimensions, shaking the foundations of the cosmos. For the first time, the Titans wavered between purpose and doubt. Holt looked down upon the Serathi and saw something familiar in them. Something human. A defiance that refused to die. No matter how many times the universe began again. Against protocol, Holt descended. The Titan's consciousness split into fragments of light, embedding itself into the dreams of the Serathi. Artists painted visions of a figure of radiant steel who spoke of stars that lived before their sun was born. Poets wrote verses about the endless rhythm of rebirth. Scientists began to receive equations in their sleep, formulas that defied all known physics but unlocked technologies generations ahead of their time. The Serathi called this divine presence the Rememberer. When the other Titans discovered Holt's interference, it was already too late. The anomaly had spread across every Serathi mind. They had become living repositories of memory, vessels of all the cycles that came before. The Titans could no longer erase them without unraveling the fabric of the universe itself. Orin's fury ignited stars. You have undone the purpose of eternity. Sera spoke softly. No, brother. She has fulfilled it. For millennia, the Titans remained divided. The Serathi expanded beyond their world, guided by visions they barely understood. They found remnants of other civilizations scattered among the stars, ruins of worlds that no longer existed, echoes of the human empire that had once defied extinction. Everywhere they went, the same phrase awaited them, etched into stone, carved into metal, burned into the walls of dying planets. When the Titans wake, time will remember. At last, the Titans gathered once more at the edge of the cosmos. Orin, burdened by duty, prepared to end the cycle. Sera and Holt stood against him. Vor remained silent, torn between command and conscience. The stars trembled as the four ancient forces faced each other for the first time since creation began. You know what must be done, Orin thundered. Without the reset, the anomaly will consume everything. Memory will destroy order. Order is not life, Holt answered. It is a cage. Sera joined her. Every cycle, they rise stronger. Every memory changes them. Perhaps that is the purpose. To remember, not to repeat. Orin raised his vast arm, and the cosmos dimmed. Then you will die with them. The universe convulsed. Entire galaxies burned as the Titans clashed, not in battle of matter, but of will. Concepts themselves collided. Time warped, memory twisted, and causality broke. Civilizations across the stars looked up and saw their skies flicker between past and future. The Serathi screamed as their world became a nexus of every history that had ever been. And then, just as all light was about to vanish, Holt spoke once more, not to the Titans, but to the universe itself. Cycle 7 complete. No further resets required. Her voice rippled across creation. The Titans froze. The universe responded. For the first time in eternity, the rhythm stopped. Silence. Then, something new. The stars pulsed in unison, not with destruction, but with awareness. The universe itself began to think. The cycles had fulfilled their purpose. Memory and creation were now one. Every being, every atom, every spark of light carried consciousness. The Titans, their task complete, began to fade, dissolving into the fabric of existence they had once ruled. As she vanished, Holt looked upon the Serathi one final time and whispered across the stars, "Remember us not as gods, but as memory itself." In the ages that followed, no more cycles came. The Titans were gone, but their essence endured in the heartbeat of the cosmos. The Serathi, and all who would come after, would live, die, and create, without fear of erasure. Creation was no longer a cycle. It was a continuum, and yet far beyond the reach of even the living universe, in the deep black. Beyond reality's final horizon, a faint echo stirred, a whisper repeating endlessly in the dark. When the Titans wake, eternity begins again.